Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Baseball Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe P. Zapia, and today it's all about the kids. We're giving back to the kids. That's right. It's about the prospects, the ones that are rising and the ones that might be falling in your fantasy baseball stock rooms. And nobody better to talk about that than the host of Prospect One, the guy who covers all the minor leaguers, the guy who writes for the Fantasy Black Book 2022. And our host here along with me on the show on MLB, it's of course the Welsh. That's right, the Welsh, a man of so many talents, so many hats, yet he's not wearing one today. And might I say, Welsh, the hair is very exceedingly high. I'm very impressed. You gained a whole full inch here.
Well, we're trying. Well, every inch counts, Joe, and we're just trying to
That's what I've been
move
told.
it up a little bit. And it's been very big hat season, as my wife keeps reminding me. So we trimmed up the hair, and as much as I can, not once this show starts going into April, we'll be a lot less hats. But I'm out at spring training. I'm out at all the backfields and stuff. So usually when I come back, it's just a disaster. So we trimmed it up. We thought we'd get good. We got a couple episodes that are going to be earlier before I hit camps, which I'm actually going to be hitting a camp later today. And it's funny you mentioned the young guys and everything. Today's actually the start of minor league spring training. So we've had a lot of the prospects that have been jumping into games, but minor league spring training action starts up. Really important because guys are going to be playing with their relative affiliates. So we're going to kind of know where some guys are going to be going. And we're just going to get a ton of prospect action. And hopefully I will be there front and center out here in AZ.
Yeah, and look, the game has changed so much in the last 5-10 years, where it used to be monitoring these guys to putting them on the watch list to drafting them late. And now some of these guys are just going to make enormous impacts on the 2023 season. We've seen in the last 5 years, these rookies, they rocket through. Teams like the White Sox really push their young players. We're going to talk about 5 guys who are going on the upswing. Before we get to those guys, I just want to do a shout out to our audience, our watchers on the YouTube channel, our listeners, because we see you, and we just hit a milestone this weekend, 10K on the YouTube channel in terms of subscribers. You made that happen. We didn't. I just want to thank you. That's a huge thing. In 2 years, we've gone from 0 to 10,000 subs on YouTube. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so, because we're leading off is going to start in just a few weeks every single day. We want you to be a part of it live. We've got a live mock draft episode happening with 10 of our friends, actually 7 of our friends, 3 of us, because it's a 10-team league, 2 of us and Scott Pianowski from Yahoo's going to be in that league. So we're taking 7 of our good pals from our Discord. Some guys and gals are going to draft against us, probably kick our rear end because they're so damn smart. But I'm telling you, youtube.com/FantasyPros MLB. We've got some great short form videos on there. We've got all the podcasts leading off. I just want to say thank you for supporting the channel, because you guys are amazing. We see your comments, and the activeness of you guys on the YouTube channel is tremendous. And in 2 years, Welsh, that's something to be proud of. It's quite a build.
Hey, I mean, I'd also say that, like, if we weren't having that type of growth, I probably wouldn't be here. So I'm really happy that everybody
well, the hair
is
helps.
Enjoying
the growth of that hair up higher certainly helps.
It's high and tight.
Did your hair subscribe to the YouTube channel? Does it have its own thing?
There you go. We just did ding. They put on notifications just like you guys should. But yeah, no, you guys are awesome. We should keep the channel going. There's tons and tons of great content here, and you are going to be 5 days a week with Joe and I as the season starts. So I'm excited that 10,000 more, and I hope a bunch more, are going to be joining us.
And we've also got, don't forget, we got the waiver wire video every week, the trade video every week too, in season. So we're there to help you, not just in draft prep, but all year through. And again, check out Wednesday live, 3 p.m. Eastern on the YouTube channel. Amazing mock drafts. Going to be really fun with our listeners, because we love interacting with y'all, and we're going to try to get some more of those going. So if you haven't, go join our Discord, fantasypros.com/chat. It's really cool. Okay, let's talk about some prospects. Enough of that. Enough of, glad handing and saying nice things to things. Let's talk about the prospects. And the first guy on your list is a guy from Cincinnati, Christian Encarcacion-Strand. There's a guy from Oklahoma State University. Rocketed through a couple levels of the minor leagues last year, went from A to AA in 2 different locations. And look, the numbers were really strong last year in the minor leagues with those 3 different teams that he played for there in the minor leagues. 32 homers, 114 ribbies. Again, it's still, not quite AAA baseball yet, but hitting 304 with a 368 OBP and a 587 slugging is pretty darn good. And this guy's having a great spring as well. He's hitting 600 at one point. He's got a couple bombs. So what do you see about Strand's path that might be changing? And is his time frame potentially moving up?
Yeah, so I wasn't like the biggest Encarnacion-Strand guy early on. He was a Minnesota Twin. He came over with Spencer Steer in the Tyler Mahle trade. Big hard hit numbers, kind of like you said, a little bit older. He's 23 years old. I guess he was
Yeah.
22 years old at like A ball. So that's not something I like jump out at when a 22-year-old is dominating A ball, but still he was on the radar. He was moving, put up a solid season last year with the Reds. He hit 7 homers in 35 games while hitting 300. He's essentially been a 290 or higher hitter at every single level. But then spring training has rolled around and he's being given an opportunity to rock with positions, like with starters. So I was at the Reds the other day and their reserve roster was Ellie De La Cruz, Noelvi Marte, Matt McClain, Austin Hendrick. I mean, their entire huge, big, prospect system. Those were the guys that were coming in, after the 6th inning when all the starters leave. Except Encarnacion-Strand was starting the game, had been starting, and he'd been starting at first, which was really interesting. Joey Votto's been injured. He just came back, but they had been giving him that spot at first to start. He's obviously also a third baseman. This spring, hitting .577, 4 homers, 13 RBI. He's got a 1,700 OPS in 26 games. And in the game I was at, rocketed a triple down center field. And I was just really, really impressed with the hard hit, with the patience, with the bat speed. His pitch recognition seems to be on because right now his bat is the working tool. Defensively, I think he's fine. But knowing that the team is working him at first base kind of tells me a lot. Will Myers came to this team and doesn't look like he's going to be a first base option like a lot of sites will have him listed at first base. In that same game, he was out in right field. So they didn't even have an opportunity to push him there. It was Strand. And I really think Strand, it could break camp with the team. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to happen because Votto did return. But them working him at first tells me that the timeline has moved way up. He's been one of the best offensive prospects or just offensive players in spring training. And this is a guy that just beats up hard hit numbers. He's going to hit 110 left and right. He's kind of like a Reds version of Brett Beatty, and he's getting more of an opportunity. And I think he's going to produce a decent amount this year. So as far as prospects rising, he was the number 1 in my most recent update over on my Patreon at inthisleague.com.
I'll tell you what, it's funny you mentioned Beatty because I think that guy is going to get a shot in Queens sooner than later. He's looked terrific this spring. He'd be on my list, but I'm not doing a list. You're doing the list. But Beatty looks, that left-handed swing, it's so smooth. My only thing with Encarnacion-Strand and all the video I've watched of him is he's got that circular load of his hands. And that's something I remember in my youth, my younger days when I was a hitting coach. Not professionally, of course. Well, actually, it was professionally. I did get paid, I should say. Not for the major leagues.
But, humble brag.
Back in the day,
Joey humble brag. No big deal. Just paid some money.
But it's true. And look, the camp that I taught at, when I was younger, it was in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. That's the elite of those young kids who are coming through, who are getting looks in college. And, I worked with those kids and when they would come through, and that circular load of the hands, it slows you up on some of the better pitching. So my only thing is, as he gets and progresses through the major league levels there in the AAA and into the big leagues, that circular load, that it holds you up a little bit. And some of the breaking pitches and some of the guys who can really, throw at a higher level. That's my only thing with this kid. And it's funny because you would think at a place like OSU, they would have knocked it out of him, and they didn't. And I understand he's got an easy swing. I understand he's got easy power. I've watched a lot of highlights. I keep waiting to see where it catches up with him, and I think it will eventually, but you can't discount the results he's getting right now in spring training because they've been spectacular. So keep an eye on him. The next guy, this is a guy that I really like. Oscar Colas. We've talked about him a lot on the show. Again, explosive hands. This is a dude that we all know how the White Sox are super aggressive. So is Colas the next guy that they're going to be super aggressive with and see a lot of playing time in 2023?
Well, I think that's the idea. I think like right now they've kind of set him and lined him up as a guy that's going to be able to take over the spot. And he's at a really, really hot spring. I went away from the numbers. I'll pull them up in a second. But last year he was able to move 2 levels. If you don't remember, Oscar Colas was like, at the time, hilariously, they called him the Cuban Ohtani because he was pitching. And we all kind of knew that was going to go by the wayside. And 24 years old, 23, 24, the White Sox just said, we're going to go full-time hitting. And he was able to move all the levels last year from high A up to triple A. and he was dominant, hit 300 across all levels. AAA was a little bit of a stink with as far as like strikeout percentage go. It went up, but he was around a 22-23% guy at those other levels. He ended up having over 20 homers, stole a couple bases. He's made really, really good decisions out here in spring. And the White Sox have left that spot open. They haven't gone and brought in like the Royals brought in like a Jackie Bradley, or they haven't gone and brought in another name that just universally will take over. Plus, they've openly said that they are going to have Eloy. Funny enough, they said they're going to have Eloy more at DH, and I think the next day after they did that, they put him out in the field before he went to the WBC.
I hate it so much, Welsh. I hate it. Just please stop putting this guy in the field. It's the worst, but continue.
Yeah, so with the commitment to him going to DH, what that does is that just leaves that spot open that they're not going to screw around with us. And so far this spring, I finally got this up, 400 with a 419 OBP, so he has not been walking, an over 1,000 OPS. He's got 2 homers. He has stolen a base, and that's a really unique one. I was actually with Oscar Colas a couple weeks ago in an event for a couple hours, and he's a big physical guy, like big upper half, does not look like a guy that's going to steal bases, but he's still doing it. I think long-term it's going to go away, but this is a guy I think that could sneak into 7 to 10 stolen bases this year, especially with that little bit of advantage on the speed. And I think he's a 20-plus homer guy. I've kind of been saying it since the early parts of spring. I think he's criminally underrated, where we put our focus on Jordan Walker and obviously the other big rookies. This is a guy that this team has all but given it a commitment to. He's dominated in spring, which was key for them to stick with that commitment. I think it's going to happen. I think he's going to break camp with the team. Oscar Colas is someone who has been rising, just hit a homer, like I said, 2 days ago. So hitting over 400 in spring, that is answering a lot of those calls. And that's one of those guys, especially from a redraft perspective, has been moving up lists, but also, is pretty high up on my prospect list if you're looking at like the long-term future.
Look, if we're in any sort of startup league this year with keepers, dynasty, whatever it might be, Colas is a guy to keep an eye on. I'm with you. He's a 20 home run guy in the big leagues. Quick hands. Again, this is the way I keep it. He's got easy power, quick hands, gets to the baseball. Yeah, there's going to be some strikeouts in there, but that's everybody nowadays. So he's a free swinger too. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way he's built, and I'm okay with that. He's not he walked, I think, 38 times last year, so it's not a huge amount. So he's going to go take his hacks, and I'm okay with that as long as he keeps making contact at the rate he does. Next guy on your list is a Seattle starting pitcher, and boy, they've been good the last few years between Kirby and Logan Gilbert. Bryce Miller, the next guy on this list. Now, Miller, last year, another one, went from A to high A to double A. And, certainly an opportunity here when you look at the overall numbers in those 26 starts that he made, a 3.16 ERA, 133 innings. So he showed you quite a bit, including a strikeout rate that was pretty strong, 163 Ks and a 1.04 whip over those 133 innings. The question is, Welsh, what's the time frame? And is there room at the end for him? Because the Seattle rotation is already really good.
So that's a big question, is what is the room for him? That I can't answer. I can't answer with Seattle. But what I can tell you is when there is room, he's the top guy. I'm pretty confident over Emerson. Emerson Hancock would be the next. There's also Prelander Baroa, Baroa is really, really interesting, got incredible stuff. I kind of wonder if he would go to the back end of a rotation. But Bryce Miller, when they're ready to make a commitment, is the guy. I spoke to him in spring, and I've already mentioned this before, but one of the most fascinating things, there's this big change in how pitchers are throwing sliders, and it's more of a sweeper, it's now called, so a lot of movement over. And Bryce Miller, who hit double A last year, but he's 24 years old, he had struck out their starting catcher, Tom Murphy, and I grabbed him after, and I was like, man, what was that you threw? Tom Murphy said it was a slider. I almost couldn't tell. And he's like, well, and then he tells me, he's like, well, sweepers are really popular right now. So I actually threw a sweeper, but I'm now throwing 2 sliders. I'm throwing a sweeper, which he adjusted, and then a gyro slider. And he's like, but what I haven't done is I haven't found quite the confidence, but I have my command on the sweeper, which is hilarious because a lot of people might cite that sweepers are a little bit less commandy. Yet this guy, huge movement across the board. He's got a big fastball. He's just got pro command. He reminds me of George Kirby. I think it's the same pass. He's cool. He's calm. He's collected. Last year, 10K per 9 across the two main levels. We're not going to focus. He had one start in low A. That doesn't matter.
Right.
ERA was solid, got a whole bunch of innings under his plate, around 120. And I think he's ready. And I think he's got like phenomenal command. And in the spring, he's gotten to 2 games so far. He struck out 6 over 5 innings. I mean, Bryce Miller is an absolute dude. He's also one of those guys that after a couple graduations, I think it's pretty safe to say that Bryce Miller is going to be an easy top 10 starting pitching prospect in minor league baseball. And if he gets an opportunity, if there's an injury or there's just some rotation open, Bryce Miller is going to be one of those guys. I'm very confident he's going to get run this year. But as far as prospects that are rising, and we're looking at pitchers, when pitchers are not, Andrew Painter getting hurt, that's not good. Bryce Miller is one of the few that's moving up.
Another guy that's moving up is Ronny Mauricio of the New York Mets, who all of a sudden over the winter became a grown-ass man. I mean, this guy looks completely different. And he was a younger prospect. We all know the international guys get signed really young and they're literally still growing. And Ronny Mauricio came into camp, and Ronny Mauricio has been hitting balls just onto another planet, it felt like, this spring. I caught more than one of his at-bats, quite a few actually. And it just looked like such a confident player right now. We know the power is real. This Mets system between Vientos and Mauricio and Alvarez and Beatty, it's a lot of good pieces that they can move. Dude. And if they do, these guys might get a quicker path to the big leagues, but still, some of these guys might be so good, you can't keep them out of at-bats at some point. Now, Mauricio is not going to make the big club. We all know that. But in terms of his stock, I think this spring has gone a long way, but you've got him on your list as well.
Yeah. This is one that I haven't made the big move on my personal prospect list, which again, I do think we can talk about it in 2 different ways. There's like prospect long-term, and then there's prospects that can help you for redraft right now.
Right.
But I have to give a deeper look at Ronny Mauricio.
A redraft guy, just to be, clear for everybody. Like Strand, maybe Miller, probably a little bit a year away. Mauricio, probably not right away either. But I mean, certainly, I think he opened some eyes.
I'd say the top 3 are definitely more redrafty guys. Mauricio is in this weird middle. It's so funny because I remember him getting time a couple years ago when he's like 19 years old at the Mets, and he was so much skinnier. And you were right. He is a grown-ass man. He got big. And last year, he put up big numbers, 26 homers, 20 stolen bases. One of the most important keys is the strikeout percentage didn't go nuts. It was 23%, and that's huge for him. He doesn't walk a ton, and his batting average has kind of consistently sunk, but he's kind of sitting in as like this 250 hitter who can run and can hit big homers. This spring, like you mentioned, 4 homers with a stolen base, hitting 304 in 23 at-bats. 4 homers in 23 at-bats. Phenomenal. 1,200 OPS. They list him at 6'3", 166. There's no way. I mean, the guy is probably pushing 200, and he's 6'3", 6'4". He's going to move off that position. I do not believe he'll be a shortstop. The problem is that the Mets team has been just so good. They've got all these corner guys. They got all these guys that are great. Mark Vientos, you got to find a spot for. Brett Beatty is good in there. You've got DH spot with Francisco Alvarez. So I don't exactly know if maybe Mauricio would transition to more of like a third, and Beatty and Vientos are more first. So that's kind of, think, what holds him back. Also, he's 21 years old. He's going to spend the year at AAA. And this spring, I think, has built renewed confidence, which is so huge. And actually, what I like about him over the other 3 guys is I think Mauricio is a dirt cheap prospect to go and buy right now. I don't think his cost is, now obviously spring is going to like push it up a tiny bit, but this isn't a big name like the rest of the guys. This is a guy that hasn't really cracked top 100s as of recent, yet he's still only 21 years old, and he's absolutely succeeding. And he's doing what we needed him to do, is he's putting the bat on the ball. This isn't like a high end, this is Anderson Simmons, like defensive shortstop. Now this is a big power bat, and he showed us off in the minors last year that he could be a 2020 guy. He's carrying into the spring, which is huge. Ronny Mauricio's arrow's ticking up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, agree with you, is a time to buy him. And whether it be for the Mets or another organization, you're going to see him. This is an important year too. I think you want to see those players when they're those young international guys, by the time they get to 20, 21 years old, start to physically fill out. Because we've seen some of those guys not do that, and their stock starts to drop, and they start to become the, well, it didn't work out kind of group. One more guy on your list here before we get to some of the ones that are falling. We're going to spend obviously more time on the guys that are rising because it's more important. But Ethan Salas, San Diego Padres, is a young guy here, 16-year-old prospect. What are your thoughts here on Salas? Because I was surprised to see him on this list.
Well, this is I want you guys to know and understand here. This is not a guy that's going to play this year. We can just put that out because he is 16 years old.
He's not going to play for a couple years.
Well, but see, that's what's different about this show. And this is why. So when the J15 class, I just talked about this on Prospect One. We did bold predictions. And one of my bold predictions, I'll just tell you guys, is I think Ethan Salas by year's end could be a top 25 prospect overall. I think he could do the version of Churio. I don't think he's going to get to AA, but Ethan Salas was one of the new international signees. And right when the class came out, everyone was on Felton with the Mariners. And I actually went on team Ethan Salas because I'm enamored with his defense. I'm enamored with his bat. He's a 5-tool player. He's really this incredible catching prospect. And then I was told by a source that this guy not only was going to be, as a 16-year-old, invited to camp, but has a shot to go and start at low A, which is unheard of. Well, sure enough, I go to Padres camp and I meet Ethan Salas. I talk to him, physically impressive. He's more impressive than guys 2 or 3 years above him. And then we get this article that comes out, Joe, that starts talking about the Hall of Fame potential of Ethan Salas. And it blew my mind of what I was hearing. And they had also confirmed that the Padres are giving consideration to sending him to low A. The story gets better. He played in a game, a 16-year-old prospect played in a spring training game the other day. He caught Ryan Weathers in like the 6th inning, which was phenomenal. You get to see his framing. You get to see his catching work. Didn't do anything with the bat, but he got an at bat. All of these things were the storytelling side that the 16-year-old really might start low A. And that might give him the potential to finish at high A. And barely over 17 years old. That's a type of rise that no one expected. You know, this is usually Felton, for example, is going to stay and play in the Dominican Summer League this year. He didn't come stateside. He's going to stay there. Ethan Salas might start next year at high A or AA as a 17-year-old. So you say he's not going to come soon. He is going to come sooner rather than later. This might be our next 19-year-old major league debuter, and his rise is going to be huge. He's going to break the curse of the bad international guys. I have been very, very big on him, and it was a bold prediction I put for Ethan Salas. But if the bat plays like I think it is, he's elite defense, and the Padres are just going to move him. He's in a spring training game. Go and watch that video. It's wild. So Ethan Salas is a huge, huge prospect riser, but it is definitely more for deeper dynasty, and you're going to have to wait a little bit.
All right, before we get to the guys who are falling on the prospect list, I want to remind everybody, cheating is okay when you use our cheat sheet creator over FantasyPros.com/draft wizard. That's where you want to go. So say goodbye to the endless hours of research, because the cheat sheet creator, again, you can select your favorite experts, me and the Welsh, or anybody out there, to customize your cheat sheets to fit your league settings and your approach, and you get a clear advantage over your competitors. So try the cheat sheet creator today and take your fantasy game to the next level over FantasyPros.com/draft wizard. Again, cheating is encouraged. If you ain't cheating, or at least cheating, you ain't trying. I'm going to keep that. I like that. What do you think of that? All right, let's get to some of the guys on the downside. We'll spend a little less time on these guys. Andrew Painter's got to be the first one. He's got the UCL sprain. There was a lot of rumors this guy was going to make the rotation. How is it going to work? You know, we don't see a lot of 19-year-old pitchers. That's shades of Dwight Gooden, 1984. But it's disappointing. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't have Tommy John. 4 weeks, the UCL sprain, and then we're going to say, come on. I've heard this story so many times. So this is a huge bummer. Obviously, 2023 is in jeopardy, but long-term, what's your projection here for him? I know short-term, he's definitely a guy that's falling because he's not going to be available for probably, my guess is at least this season.
Yeah, he was going to do, I think Julio Urias was the last 19-year-old pitcher to make the major. I think they just talked about that in the WBC playing for Mexico. But yeah, no, it's a huge disappointment. They were giving legitimate consideration of him breaking camp and using those innings at the major league level. I don't feel optimistic that UCL is going to feel good. I don't think the team really cared about the timeline. So that's why I think they're just going to sit on it for a month. And if they come back, they just give Tommy John, and it's just going to push. The next year is already lost if that's the case. So I don't feel optimistic about it. What's really interesting is there's a lot of conversation right now in the prospect world about like where and how does he fall. And there was a trade offer I had saw. Someone was like, who'd you rather have, Tyler Soderstrom or Andrew Painter? And multiple prospect people were saying that they would actually take Tyler Soderstrom right now. And that's not the case for me, just because like he's a 19-year-old. It's a 19-year-old pitcher. I don't want to give up. Prospect timelines don't usually change necessarily off of injury. I don't love that he's having that he could theoretically have Tommy John, but there's also kind of a sense of like, well, got it out of the way,
Hey,
and
look,
maybe it
Giolito
slows his
was really
timeline.
young too, and he was a very highly regarded, top 5 pitching prospect, and it worked out pretty well for him for a few years. I know last year was a down year, but we already talked we're buying back in. So
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about Painter long term, but for this year, there's absolutely the stock down. What about Daniel Espino, Cleveland starting pitcher too? This is another guy that's part of an organization that's done a pretty good job over the last 20 years of creating some pitching prospects here and cashing in on them. So what do you think of Espino? Why is he going in the wrong direction for you?
Well, also injury related stuff. He's got, I believe, he had left shoulder soreness and swelling that happened after a throwing session in January. If people don't know, also Daniel Espino completely retransformed his body. It's wild. He looks like a bodybuilder in pictures he had shared this offseason. Much more lower maintained type of guy who's it was like off the charts to me with how he looked. But in all of that, and I think this has been a very common thing I've seen in young players, is when that body overtakes a big, massive change, there's a time period that they've got to readjust to it, whether it is, losing weight or gaining muscle or whatever it is. And maybe that played a role in it. But Daniel Espino is one of the hardest throwers in baseball. And to also have like shoulder soreness and swelling, that's really, really bad. And then he had it was a tear of like a capsule in his shoulder. Bottom line, he's missing about 8 weeks. This was as of like February, and that's going to take him into some of the minor league season lost. But this is another one of those pitchers with like a severe arm injury that's going to go into the year, and this kind of takes back the timeline. So like Andrew Painter, this isn't a guy that I want to tank in value, but this guy has had multiple injuries and missed time and is worth consideration of like, how high do we really want him? Could this be the next Alex Reyes? Could he be better for the back of a bullpen if he can't stay healthy? So what I think has happened is Daniel Espino is moving into this territory where he was battling Ricky Tiedemann and Yuri Perez. He was in that range. And I think he's moving back to being like, do we really want to risk him over Tink Hence or even Bryce Miller at this point? So I think he's moved back a tier because of this injury, which is another back-to-back season injury. And this one is coming before the start of the year. And there's just like a lot of lost potential right now. So Daniel Espino is one of those guys kind of been out of sight, out of mind recently, but it's because he's just not on the field because he's injured.
Marco Luciano just got optioned by the San Francisco Giants back down to Double-A. He had a injury-riddled 2022 and 2023. Now it's a huge show-me year for him. He's 21 years old. He's been a big-time prospect for a while now, and I understand, when you get sent back down, your stock's going to go down. Nobody's, I think, too shocked about this. But where do you stand here with Luciano? Are you a guy that you are buying on him right now because it's at a rock bottom price, or are you staying away because maybe this is one of these guys that just doesn't quite ever realize his potential?
So I definitely am all about buying in on really talented players. And I'll tell you this, Marco Luciano is a incredibly talented player. I got to see him at multiple different levels. It's crazy, crazy bat speed with crazy power. He kind of moved away from running a little bit, and I think he could be moved off this position. That's kind of been thought of forever. But I'm starting to get into a space where I'm over it. He came up in the same rookie level as CJ Abrams and Corbin Carroll. And I've cited this before. And look at those guys. Those are both,
Right.
major league starters. Corbin Carroll just got $111 million. And Marco Luciano can't hit Double-A. And he consistently gets hurt. He underperforms. He was hurt all last year. He hurt himself in the Dominican Winter League, his back that he's recovering from. His timeline has slowed, and that is really turning me off. So and I've been a defender of Marco Luciano for a long time because I think offensively, he really has the potential to be an elite player, but the strikeout numbers have been worrisome. Overall contact rates, I think, are going to drop as he gets to higher levels. So at this point, I'm off of Marco Luciano, and I hate to do it because I think he's a really talented player, and he could be a buyback if someone's on him real cheap. But I think his stock is falling. The Dominican Winter League injury was just one more bad notch in his belt, and I don't think there's any feasible way we see him this year. So he's at least 2 years behind his peers from rookie ball.
All right. Next guy on the list was somebody actually going into the year in spring training you were pretty high on, was Matt Mervis, Chicago Cubs first baseman. So why are we souring, Welsh?
Yes, Matt Mervis. Well, okay. One of the things I can tell you about Matt Mervis was I thought this job was going to be handed to him. It seemed like it was going to be handed to him. And the Chicago Cubs did everything possible to not give him the job. They signed Eric Hosmer. They signed Trey Mancini. They brought in Edwin Rios. And we said, okay, well, he was a phenomenal year last year. One of the few prospects, one of the most impressive things I've ever seen is first off the 76, I think, extra bases he had between doubles and homers. He also improved his strikeout rate at every single level last year while walking more. All great stuff. He was good in the AFL, but there's something off. And you could see in the AFL that that it was going to be like high velocity fastballs and good pitch mixes were going to mess with him. Defensively, I didn't know if he was up there, and just something seemed off as they kept signing players. Well, he's had the conversation around this was, oh, well, Eric Hosmer can't hold him down, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you got to have a good spring. If you have a good spring, I think you can get this team off even though I think they brought Hosmer in for leadership, you could push him off. Matt Mervis has not had a good spring. He's hitting 118 in 17 at bats. He's got a 318 OBP. His OPS is 494. He has 2 total hits. This is not the spring that he needed to crack that roster when they've got all these first basemen. So where he was moving up in NFBC drafts, we saw him crack the top 200. That's gone. That is completely gone with Matt Mervis. And I think it's going to take some AAA seasoning. It's going to take a bad bat for Hosmer. And where if he had been good in spring and they still sent him down, I would have been like, all right, May, he could come up. I think this is a halfway through the year where the Cubs have to have a realization they're out of it. They move on from Hosmer, and then Mervis comes up. So I think their worry has kind of moved over to me in really the huge jump that he's been given. I still think he's a great prospect. I think he's got huge power. He's going to find a good spot, but I think there might be some bigger questions about the type of quality contact he's actually going to make. And we're going to see it this year with whatever full season of AAA before he's brought up to the majors.
Last guy on the list is a Yankee. A lot of Yankee prospects are getting a lot of helium. Volpe, Dominguez, Peraza. Not so much Austin Wells. The only thing he's really got going for him right now is an amazing Rick Cerrone-esque mustache, because I love this picture of him here. But let's talk about Austin Wells right now, catching prospect for the Yankees. What are your thoughts on him? Why is he also somebody that's falling in your ranks?
Well, it was just the injury. Again, these are very injury focused. I think it's hard at this point in spring training to really pick on a lot of prospects and players to be major fallers. I mean, one I would have thrown at you is Kumar Rocker. Really incredible of how bad Kumar Rocker has been in spring and how inconsistent he's been in bullpen sessions. And maybe it's going to, I want him to be good. I desperately want him to be good. I love it. I think his slider is his key to everything, kind of like how Hunter Green was, but it's just not happening. The confidence, consistency is not there. So a lot of these, outside of those tiny specific ones, have to be more tangible things like an injury. And Austin Wells, who I think was moving up a little bit, had a 15-15 season, bat's been pretty live, has not moved off that position either. I interviewed him in the AFL a year and a year and a half ago. And I'd asked him, would the team consider playing him anywhere else? And he's like, the team has never talked to me about it. He's never been talked about moving off that position. So one of the reasons I think that's kind of a negative is I don't think he's particularly a crazy high-end defensive catcher. And I just don't, and when you have Trevino, you already have Jose Trevino and Kyle, I don't think they're going to be that's a position that he's going to be able to crack anytime soon. So if he were to be moving and playing some other spots, I feel a little bit more optimistic, but just suffered an injury that's going to set him back a little bit for the start of the season. I think positionally that's out there. And it's also, we're kind of flooded with catchers. I've moved him down just a little bit, but this is the barrage of injury. It's Matt Mervis and the injuries. That's a new band name. It's Matt Mervis and all the injuries for the 5 that are moving down.
I heard they're playing Coachella this year. It's going to be awesome. Just to recap, everybody, the prospects that are falling: Andrew Painter, pitcher for the Phillies; Daniel Espino, Cleveland starter; Marco Luciano, shortstop for the Giants; Matt Mervis, first baseman for the Cubs; and Austin Wells, New York Yankees catcher. The ones on the rise: Christian Encarnacion-Strand, corner guy for the Cincinnati Reds; and Oscar Colas from the White Sox; outfielder Bryce Miller on his way up for Seattle; and the starting pitcher Ronny Mauricio, the shortstop for the New York Mets, grown boy now, and Ethan Salas, the young boy, for the San Diego Padres, the catching prospects. So there you have it. Make sure you drop a comment below the prospects that you are watching here on our YouTube channel. And again, congratulations, fam. We did it. 10K subs. Now the next goal's got to be 15. So if you haven't already, go subscribe.
Let's go.
YouTube.com/FantasyPros. Don't forget Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, Scott Pianowski, the Welsh, Joey P, and a bunch of our pals here from our crew are going to be mock drafting it up head-to-head category style. So join us for that. And if you ain't cheat sheeting, you ain't trying, FantasyPros.com/draftwizard. Go check it out, download the app, and try your hand at creating some cheat sheets today. That'll do it for us. But the story of the game goes on. For the Welsh, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.